This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Robert Scott. Miscellaneous Essays by Thomas De Quincey. Section 17. Dinner, Real and Reputed, Part 4. This revolution as to dinner was the greatest in virtue and value ever accomplished. In fact, those are always the most operative revolutions which are brought about through social or domestic changes. A nation must be barbarous, neither could it have much intellectual business which dined in the morning. They could not be at ease in the morning. So much must be granted. Every day has its separate quantum, its dose, note, as the doctrinists of rent phrase it, of anxiety, that could not be digested so soon as noon. No man will say it. He, therefore, who dined at noon, was willing to sit down, squalid as he was, with his dress unchanged, his cares not washed off. And what follows from that? Why, that to him, to such a canine or cynical specimen of the genus Homo, dinner existed only as a physical event, a mere animal relief, a mere carnal enjoyment. For what, we demand, did this fleshy creature differ from the carrion crow, or the kite, or the vulture, or the cormorant? A French judge, in an action upon a wager, laid it down in law, that man only had a bouche, all other animals had a gueule. Only with regard to the horse, in consideration of his beauty, nobility, use, and in honor of the respect with which man regarded him by the courtesy of Christendom, he might be allowed to have a bouche, and his reproach of brutality, if not taken away, might thus be hidden. But surely of the rabid animal who is caught dining at noonday, the Homo ferus, who affronts the meridian sun like Thyestes and Atreus by his inhumane meals, we are, by parity of reason, entitled to say that he has a maw, note, so has Milton's death, but nothing resembling a stomach. And to this vile man a philosopher would say, Go away, sir, and come back to me 2 or 3 centuries hence, when you have learned to be a reasonable creature, and to make that physico-intellectual thing out of dinner which it is meant to be, and is capable of becoming. In Henry VII's time, the court dined at 11 in the forenoon, but even that hour was considered so shockingly late in the French court that Louis XII actually had his gray hairs brought down with sorrow to the grave, by changing his regular hour of half past 9 for 11 in gallantry to his young English bride. Footnote to follow. He fell a victim to late hours in the forenoon. Footnote, his young English bride. The case of an old man, or one reputed old, marrying a very girlish wife, is always to be much for the gravity of history, and rather than loose the joke, the historian prudently disguises the age, which after all was little above 50. And the very persons who insist on the late dinner as the proximate cause of death, elsewhere insinuate something else, not so decorously expressed. It is odd that this amiable prince, so memorable as having been a martyr to late dining at 11 a.m., was the same person who is so equally memorable for the noble answer about a king of France not remembering the wrongs of a Duke of Orleans. In Cromwell's time they dined at 1 P.M. 1 century and a half had carried them on by 2 hours. Doubtless old cooks and scullions wondered what the world would come to next. Our French neighbors were in the same predicament, but they far surpassed us in veneration for the meal. They actually dated from dinner. Dinner constituted the great era of the day. L'après dîner is almost the sole date which you can find in Cardinal de Ritz's Memoirs of the Fronde. Dinner was their hegira. Dinner was their line in traversing the ocean of day. They crossed the equator when they dined. Our English Revolution came next. It made some little difference, we have heard people say, in church and state, but its great effects were perceived in dinner. People now dined at 2. So dined Addison for his last 30 years. So dined Pope, who was coeval with the Revolution through his entire life. Precisely as the rebellion of 1745 arose, did people, but observe, very great people, advance to 4 P.M. Philosophers who watch the semina rerum and the first symptoms of change had perceived this alteration singing in the upper air like a coming storm some little time before. About the year 1740, Pope complains to a friend of Lady Suffolk's dining so late as 4. Young people may bear those things, he observes, but as to himself, now turned of 50, if such doings went on, if Lady Suffolk would adopt such strange hours, he must really absent himself from Marble Hill. Lady Suffolk had a right to please herself. He himself loved her. But if she would persist, all which remained for a decayed poet was respectfully to cut his stick and retire. Whether Pope ever put up with 4 o'clock dinners again, we have vainly sought to fathom. Some things advance continuously, like a flood or a fire, which always makes an end of A, eat and digest it before they go on to B. Other things advance per saltum. They do not silently cancer their way onwards, but lie as still as a snake after they have made some notable conquest. Then, when unobserved, they make themselves up for mischief, and take a flying bound onwards. Thus advanced dinner, and by these fits got into the territory of evening. And ever as it made a motion onwards, it found the nation more civilized, else the change would not have been effected, and raised them to a still higher civilization. The next relay on that line of road, the next repeating frigate, is Cowper, in his poem on Conversation. He speaks of 4 o'clock as still the elegant hour for dinner, the hour for the lautiores and the lepidi homines. Now, this was written about 1780, or a little earlier, perhaps, therefore, just one generation after Pope's Lady Suffolk. But then Cowper was living amongst the rural gentry, not in high life. Yet again, Cowper was nearly connected by blood with the eminent Whig house of Cowper, and acknowledged as a kinsman. About 25 years after this, we may take Oxford as a good exponent of the national advance.